Hi, I'm Indy Dhillon from The Bitter Truth, and I'm here to present the insights we found from your data. Now, I'm going to go over an overview of the data today, followed by a summary of the ABV and IBU data, and lastly, going to go over some insights. Now, we received two data sets from you, breweries and beers, and we merged those together into one data set and found that there were 558 total breweries, and that ranged from 1 per state to 47 per state. And here's a heat map of that distribution. We see that there are some population centers like California, Texas, and Pennsylvania that have a high number of breweries as we expect, but there are also some interesting points like Colorado here with 47 breweries and New England being fairly underrepresented. Now the question of missing values came up with this data. There were some missing values in the ABV field, as well as over 40% of the IBUs missing. This was possibly due to state law or the complexity of testing IBUs, but we needed some methods for handling this missing data. We chose two methods that we call method 1 and method 2 here. Method 1 is to just eliminate all the rows with missing data, and method 2 was to replace missing data with the average values. So to give you a summary of the ABV and IBU data, the lowest median ABV of any state was Arizona and Texas with 4%, and the highest were for Maine and Colorado with 6.7 and 6.5% respectively. On average, we saw 5.6% ABV across states. Now, the lowest IBU was for Wisconsin, which had a median IBU of 19. You can compare that with Maine, which had a median IBU of 61. So that's quite the difference there. The average IBU was about 67% across states. And the interesting thing about Maine was that not only did it have the highest IBU, it also had the highest ABV. Maybe it's the cold, but they really like their strong beer in Maine. Now, we wanted to move on and look at the correlation between ABV and IBU. What we found was there was actually a moderate to moderately strong correlation between these two values. So when we looked at the method 1 data, where we only looked at complete data, we found a 0.67 correlation between ABV and IBU. With method 2, with average values, it was 0.52. So what does that look like? This is what it looks like, where we have, for values with beers with high IBU, we have high ABVs, and with beers with low IBUs, we tend to have low ABVs. And this is for beers overall. So we do see this correlation between ABV and IBU overall. But the question was, is that the whole story? We decided to dig deeper and look at the top 12 styles of beer, which represent 65% of data. And we found that when we look by style, there wasn't that same strong linear correlation between ABV and IBU. It seems instead that for a given style of beer, there's a range of ABVs and IBUs that are normal. And as long as you're within that range, then you're probably okay. Next, we wanted to compare IPAs and other ales. And we did see that IPAs are a little bit special in that they have both high IBUs and high ABVs, as we can see by these charts here. If we break it up individually by beer, we can see that there's a good clumping of IPAs here in the high ABV, high IBU range. Similarly, for other ales, there's a clumping in the low ABV, low IBU range. The question was, based on this information, could we classify beers as either IPA or ale, just based on IBU and ABV? And the answer was, in fact, we could. We used an algorithm called KNN and found that we were able to successfully classify 88% of beers as ale or IPA using the method 1 correction. Using the method 2 correction of using average values, we were 83% accurate, so still quite good. And finally, we wanted to look at the question of West Coast IPAs. There's this idea of the West Coast IPA, which is a higher IBU, more hoppy beer, and it's a subcategory of IPA that was not labeled in this data. So we wanted to see, is there a difference in West Coast IPAs in general? Now, looking at the breakdown per state, we do see that there were more IPAs in the West Coast states, with California having the most IPAs and the East Coast being fairly underrepresented in terms of IPAs. But when we looked at the average IBUs of West Coast IPAs, it was actually roughly the same as other states. We see this black bar in the middle of the box is best average, and it's roughly the same. But the distributions look a little bit different. So when we looked at the distributions, one interesting thing we noted was that for the West Coast, there were more beers in this 80 to 100 IBU range. This was interesting because even though the average IBU for West Coast IPAs was the same as other regions, the IPAs in this 80 to 100 IBU range were overrepresented. So maybe there is, in fact, this West Coast IPA, and it's showing up in this bump right here. So that's the summary of what we found today. We took the data, gave you some information about the ABUs, ABVs, and IBUs, and presented some findings about the correlation between ABV and IBU, how we can predict IPAs based on this, and what the meaning is of the West Coast IPA. I hope that you have found this presentation to be useful. Thank you for your time.